It always begins with a whisper, not from the outside world, but from within, a quiet, persistent thought that says, "This isn't who I'm meant to be." For most, the whisper fades. Life drowns it out with deadlines, expectations, and the comfortable hum of routine. But for a few, it grows louder until it becomes impossible to ignore. This is the story of one such man. Let's call him Thomas, a middle-aged executive in Chicago. On paper, he had it all. A corner office, a respectable title, a house in the suburbs, and a family that loved him. Yet, every night, as he stared at the ceiling, something gnawed at him. A sense that he was surviving, not living, reacting, not creating, existing, not becoming. It wasn't depression, it was clarity. A cold, piercing realization that the man he presented to the world was a shell, a carefully manufactured identity shaped by fear, social conditioning, and a lifelong addiction to approval. He smiled when he was angry. He nodded when he disagreed. He complied when his soul screamed for rebellion. And one day, standing before his bathroom mirror, Thomas heard the whisper again. "This version of you must die." Not literally, but the false self, the weak, deluded persona molded by society, had to be dismantled. It wasn't about tweaking habits or chasing the next self-help fad. It was about annihilation, a total psychological reset. The first lesson: you cannot negotiate transformation. You must execute it. You see, the modern man has been trained to play nice, to blend in, to wait his turn. But life does not reward politeness. It rewards precision. It rewards power. And power demands that we shed our illusions like dead skin. The old self, the people pleaser, the procrastinator, the man addicted to comfort, is not a foundation. He is a liability. This is where the journey begins, not with motivation, but with mourning. You must grieve the man you were, then burn him at the altar of truth, because until that man is gone, the man you were born to become cannot rise. This isn't about cruelty, it's about clarity. You cannot build strength on the rotting scaffolding of weakness. You must destroy the counterfeit before the real can emerge. And so, if you're reading this, watching this, living this, you may be where Thomas once stood, on the precipice of something terrifying and beautiful: reinvention. The battlefield is not out there, it is within, and it starts with one brutal act of courage, the act of letting go. Comment below, "The old me is dead." Then come back for part 2, because the silence that follows death is where rebirth begins. Rebirth does not come with applause. It comes in silence, deep, isolating, and often misunderstood. After Thomas made the decision to let go of his old self, the world didn't celebrate. It ignored him. That's the nature of transformation. It begins in solitude. He withdrew, not out of bitterness, but necessity. No more social gatherings that left him empty. No more conversations laced with superficial praise. No more pretending. Instead, he built a new environment, a forge, not a comfort zone. This stage is brutal. There are no shortcuts. Isolation forces you to meet the person you've avoided your entire life, yourself. Without distractions, without excuses. Just you, your flaws, and your will to rise. It is here that the foundation of strength is laid. In quiet mornings of cold showers and unread journals. In nights of reflection without the glow of validation. In meals eaten alone but savored in discipline. Thomas turned his apartment into a crucible. He trained without an audience. He read not to impress, but to sharpen. He meditated until silence became his language. He replaced every external dependency with internal command. Friends asked where he'd gone. He offered no explanations. Growth does not require permission. Why does isolation matter? Because mediocrity is contagious. Stay too long around those who fear discomfort, and their habits will infect your future. Isolation is not exile. It is strategy. It is the retreat before the strike. Every empire is first built in silence. Most people avoid this stage. They fear being alone. They confuse loneliness with weakness. But the truth is the opposite. Isolation reveals what distractions conceal, your unfiltered reality. And only in this space can you begin the slow, ruthless work of rebuilding. This isn't the time for grand declarations. It's the time for daily grind, small, consistent actions, discipline over dopamine, vision over impulse. Every repetition, every page, every quiet victory compounds. And slowly, without applause, a new man is forged, one who does not flinch when the world tests him. The Thomas that emerged from this solitude was not louder. He was sharper, not angry, but clear. His strength was not in muscles or money, but in discipline. He no longer needed to prove anything. He had already proven it to himself. If you're in this season, this forge of silence, honor it. Do not rush. Do not explain. Do not expect others to understand. You are not disappearing. You are reappearing, stronger, colder, clearer. Comment below. I forge myself in silence. Then return for part 3, because without discipline, the man you are building will collapse. Discipline is the spine of rebirth. Without it, all progress crumbles. It's not flashy. It's not motivational. It's the quiet, ruthless enforcement of your own standards, even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. Thomas learned this the hard way. Early in his transformation, he relied on bursts of motivation. He'd wake up inspired, conquer the day, and feel unstoppable. Until one morning, the fire was gone. The motivation didn't come. The silence felt heavier. He lay in bed, rationalizing why today could be a rest day. That's when it clicked. If he only moved when inspired, he would never move far. Discipline isn't about feeling like doing the work. It's doing the work regardless of feeling. It's setting a command and obeying it as if carved into stone. Rise at 5, train at 6. Study until the mind bleeds clarity. Eat with purpose, rest with intent. Repeat without negotiation. Most men wait. They wait to feel ready. They wait to be in the mood. They wait for the right time. But time waits for no one. And the man who waits becomes the man who watches others rise. The disciplined man, on the other hand, becomes a weapon, predictable, consistent, indestructible. Thomas began writing down his commands every night, not goals, commands. Wake up at 5 o'clock, train for 45 minutes, no sugar, read 30 pages, reflect before bed. These were not optional, they were law. And when his body rebelled, when his mind begged for comfort, he followed the law, not his mood. Discipline reshapes identity. It molds you into someone your past self would not recognize and your future self will thank. It strips away the fluff and leaves behind only function. You begin to move differently, speak less, listen more, waste nothing. You become intimidating, not because you try, but because you're focused. But be warned, discipline is a lonely road. It will cost you comfort, convenience, and sometimes even companionship. People will not understand why you disappear, why you say no, why your eyes look distant. That's fine. Discipline is not for understanding, it's for building. Eventually, Thomas stopped waiting for the world to reward his effort. He wasn't doing it for them. He was doing it because he was building a man who could not be broken, a man whose habits were sharper than others' ambitions, a man who became his own source of power. So understand this, every moment you honor your command, you rewrite who you are. A person who understands themselves finds their own inner strength. They become their own driving force. Share your thoughts below. Discipline is my strength. Join us for part 4, because discipline without perspective can be limiting. True strength is most effective when guided by self-awareness, and that awareness begins with maintaining a clear viewpoint. As Thomas continued on his journey of self-improvement, he noticed something subtle but profound. The more focused he became, the more his feelings presented new challenges. He felt impatient when progress was slow and misunderstood when others questioned his path. At times, he also felt isolated. He realized that if he let these feelings guide him, they could hinder his progress. So he learned the next lesson. Maintaining perspective isn't a weakness, it's a sign of inner balance. It doesn't mean the absence of feelings, but the ability to observe them without being directed by them. Thomas still experienced strong emotions. He still experienced a range of feelings, from enthusiasm to disappointment. However, he learned to observe these emotions without being driven by them. He allowed them to pass through his awareness like the wind, acknowledged but not acted upon. Often, people are guided by their immediate reactions. When faced with criticism, they might respond hastily. When feeling unheard, they might withdraw. When distracted, they can lose focus. In those moments, their clarity can diminish. True strength, however, is composed and thoughtful. It is calm and deliberate. This sense of inner poise gave Thomas a unique perspective. In meetings, he spoke less, but his words carried great weight. While others hurried to be heard, he chose to listen. When challenged, he would simply offer a calm smile, a response that others found remarkable. He became centered and unshakable. This approach also freed him from needing validation from others. He no longer sought constant approval or felt the need to explain his choices. He stopped hoping others would understand his journey. He realized something liberating. He owed no one an explanation for his evolution. And that silence? It made him magnetic. But detachment doesn't mean isolation forever. It means relationships on your terms. It means loving without dependency, helping without needing applause, leading without being controlled by how others feel about you. It's the art of presence without imprisonment. Emotion is a tool, not a master. Detachment gives you the ability to wield it precisely, like a surgeon with a blade. You learn to act based on principle, not pressure, purpose, not impulse, and that makes you rare. Thomas became the kind of man who could walk away from anything without flinching. He remained true to his principles, even when it meant letting go of certain opportunities. This came not from a lack of feeling, but from a clear sense of direction. This clarity gave him a steady foundation. To become steadfast, one must practice a centered perspective because life presents many different influences. A centered approach helps you stay grounded on your path. Next, we explore handling challenges. If you don't learn to navigate them, they can influence your choices. These feelings are also deeply personal. For one individual, this feeling wasn't loud. It was a quiet, subtle presence that appeared as hesitation or overthinking before a new opportunity. We are often taught to be thoughtful about such feelings. One way to approach challenges is to discuss and understand them. Thomas, however, learned that for true growth, he needed to embrace them directly. He realized that to lead with confidence, one must first find it within. A person guided by apprehension may pause or feel unsure. To build his own foundation of self-assurance, Thomas made challenges his learning opportunities. He didn't avoid difficult situations, he welcomed them. Public speaking, important negotiations, and meaningful conversations. He moved toward the things that once gave him pause. He did this because he understood something vital. Challenges are not barriers, but mirrors. They reflect opportunities for personal development. Every time he stepped into a challenge, he learned more about himself and expanded his capabilities. Slowly, his nervous system adapted. He could enter rooms that once intimidated him, speak with those who once silenced him, make decisions that once paralyzed him. And others began to notice, not because he was louder, but because he was still. Power, Thomas discovered, isn't about aggression. It's about presence. People don't obey because they're told to. They obey because they sense something different, something unshakable. That difference is often fearlessness, or at least the appearance of it. That's where the psychology of power lives, not in volume, but in precision, not in domination, but in command. When Thomas entered a room, he said less, but people leaned in. He asked fewer questions, but got more answers. Why? Because he had trained himself to be the calmest man in chaos. He mastered the art of perceived inevitability. His body language, his tone, even his silence communicated one thing: I don't flinch. And when others feel that, they submit, not to the man, but to the power he represents. Remember this: people don't follow kindness. They don't follow intelligence. They follow certainty. And certainty, when forged in the fire of fear, becomes terrifyingly effective. To lead others, you must first rule yourself. To rule yourself, you must walk through every corridor fear tries to lock. Open the doors, walk the halls, dismantle the illusions, and emerge with one truth written in your core: I am no longer afraid. Comment below. Fear is my ally. Return for part 6, because strategy, not strength, is what truly moves the board. Strength without strategy is chaos. It's a sword swung blindly in the dark. What Thomas learned next was simple, but brutal. The world doesn't reward raw effort. It rewards those who move like chess players, not boxers. By now, he had discipline. He had silence. He had emotional control. But without direction, even the sharpest blade dulls. So he embraced the sixth principle, strategic dominance. Life, he realized, is not a fair game. It's not even a fight. It's a map of moves, and most people don't even know they're on the board. Strategy begins with awareness. Thomas started observing people, not with judgment, but precision. He noticed how they revealed their insecurities through overtalking, how they signaled their ambitions in what they chased, how they surrendered their power in what they feared. Everyone, he realized, is broadcasting a playbook. You just have to be silent enough to see it. He stopped reacting. He started anticipating. In meetings, he spoke last, not first. At negotiations, he let others overexpose their desires while he held his cards. In conversations, he paused, not because he didn't know what to say, but because silence made people reveal more than words ever could. But strategy isn't just about others. It's about positioning. Thomas didn't just plan for the day. He planned 5 steps ahead. He built relationships before he needed them. He created value before asking for anything. He cultivated leverage quietly until he could move with invisible force. Manipulation, he learned, isn't evil. It's simply reality. The media manipulates, companies manipulate, culture manipulates. If you don't play, you get played. The key is intent. Thomas didn't manipulate to deceive. He manipulated to direct, to shift outcomes with precision. Like a grandmaster adjusting pieces no one else saw. He wore masks, carefully. In some rooms he was approachable, in others, detached. But always, he chose who he needed to be. Not because he lacked identity, but because identity is a tool. People who show everything are vulnerable. Those who reveal selectively, they become enigmas. Victory, Thomas discovered, is rarely about the final move. It's won in the setup, in creating circumstances where the only possible result is yours. The most powerful men are not loud. They are calculated, measured, patient. So understand this. If you wish to rise, stop playing checkers in a world of chess. Learn the game, study the board, and move like no one saw you coming. Comment below. I move the pieces. Return for part 7, because power without presence is invisible, and we're about to make you undeniable. Power is not always about what you do. Often, it's about what others feel when you simply enter the room. This is the aura of authority. And Thomas knew he had to build it, deliberately. Authority isn't granted, it's projected. You don't ask for it, you radiate it. When Thomas began showing up with the presence of someone who needed nothing, people treated him differently. Not because he demanded respect, but because he made respect feel inevitable. How? It began with self-command. A man who cannot rule himself will never command a room. Thomas fine-tuned his body language. No fidgeting, no looking around nervously. His eyes met others directly, calm, unwavering. His voice slowed down. Fewer words, more impact. He replaced urgency with intention. Then came consistency. He didn't just say he'd do something, he did it. Every single time. No excuses, no apologies. Over time, this created an unspoken rule. If Thomas said it, it would happen. That reliability bred trust, and trust is the seed of authority. He also mastered the power of restraint. He didn't correct every wrong. He didn't chase every insult. He chose his battles, and when he did engage, people listened. Because silence was his norm, his words carried weight. Authority is not about dominating a conversation. It's about controlling the tempo of attention. Presentation mattered too. Thomas began dressing with intentional precision. Not to impress, but to reflect the man he was becoming. Structured, sharp, decisive. He carried himself like a leader long before anyone called him one. And that subtle shift in posture, in presence, in poise, changed everything. People started seeking his approval, even when he gave none. Colleagues paused when he entered. Meetings shifted when he spoke. Even critics treaded carefully, not out of fear, but from the silent pressure of someone who didn't need to be loud to be powerful. Here's the truth. The world doesn't follow the loudest man. It follows the most grounded, the one whose calm can settle a storm, the one whose silence is a presence in itself. That's the man Thomas was becoming. That's the man you must build. So walk slower, speak less, deliver more. Make yourself a standard others adjust to, not the other way around. Comment below. I am the authority in every room. Return for part 8, because even kings fall if they lose emotional control, and now we enter the battlefield of the heart. If power is war, then emotion is the battlefield, and most men lose that war every day, not because they're weak, but because they were never trained to fight it. Thomas understood this when he caught himself reacting, not externally, but internally. A passive-aggressive email triggered irritation, a dismissive comment sparked old insecurities, and even though he didn't respond outwardly, he felt the emotional disruption within. That's when he realized, emotional control is not about hiding reactions, it's about not having them. The Machiavellian strategist is calm, not because he suppresses feelings, but because he rewires them. He understands that emotion is leverage for himself and for others. Thomas began studying patterns. What made him angry? What made him anxious? What made him overinvest or retreat? He took notes, literally. Emotional awareness became part of his strategy journal, and then he began testing control, pausing before replying, breathing when tension rose, and, most importantly, noticing the gap between stimulus and response. In that space, power lives. Then he flipped the mirror. If emotions could control him, they could control others. So he began using them, not maliciously but deliberately. He learned that envy distorts loyalty, guilt drives compliance, fear triggers obedience, and desire clouds judgment. With a sentence, a silence, or a glance, he could tilt the emotional balance of a room. Manipulation isn't always lies. Often it's suggestion, a planted idea, a pause that makes someone speak more than they intended, a compliment that makes them seek more approval. Emotional warfare isn't loud, it's surgical. But Thomas was careful. The goal was never to lose himself in the game. The moment you become emotionally entangled in your own manipulation, you become vulnerable. Detachment remained his shield. He never acted out of spite or ego, only purpose. And sometimes the most powerful emotional tactic is indifference. Nothing breaks a manipulator like your silence. Nothing confuses an aggressor like your calm. Nothing weakens the needy like your absence. Thomas learned to walk away without flinching, not to prove anything, but because he didn't need to stay. This, he discovered, is emotional sovereignty. The ability to stay grounded when others spiral. The skill to use emotion without being used by it, to become the storm when necessary, and the stillness when required. Master this, and your presence becomes a psychological advantage. You won't just move the pieces, you'll move the minds behind them. Comment below. I control the battlefield of emotion. Return for part 9. Because emotional mastery births legacy, and it's time to talk about what outlives you. Most men live, die, and are forgotten. Their names dissolve into time, their efforts buried beneath routine. But some become more than memories. They become forces, echoes that shape lives, decisions, and futures long after they're gone. That's legacy. Thomas didn't want applause. He wanted impact, not the kind that fades with headlines, but the kind that alters people, quietly, permanently. That became his new mission, to become untouchable. Not untouchable by arrogance or status, but by design. He started by removing dependency. Anything that could be taken from him, approval, validation, money, comfort, was no longer his foundation. Because what is borrowed can be revoked. True legacy must be self-sustained. So Thomas became the source of his own fire. He needed no permission to rise. Next came adaptability. The world changes. People shift. Power moves. But a man rooted in purpose and fluid in strategy cannot be erased. Thomas trained himself to adjust without losing his core. When others panicked, he pivoted. When others resisted, he recalibrated. He didn't survive change, he used it. But the most dangerous weapon in his arsenal was invisibility. Thomas learned when to disappear, to observe without being seen, to influence without recognition. Sometimes presence is power. Sometimes absence is stronger. When no one knows your next move, they cannot stop it. He also mastered silence, not as retreat, but as pressure. When attacked, he didn't respond. When provoked, he didn't engage. His silence became a mirror, and people saw their own fears reflected back. That silence outlasted rumors, envy, and slander. Because legacy doesn't argue, it endures. Thomas' life became a blueprint, not one people copied, but one they felt. His discipline inspired others, even his enemies. His control made imitators out of critics. He wasn't seeking followers, but they followed anyway. Because the highest form of influence is unconscious replication. Legacy isn't about being liked, it's about being undeniable. When even those who disagree with you begin to mimic your structure, your presence, your discipline, your shadow has already outlived you. That's when you stop being a man. You become a myth, a standard, a benchmark others quietly compare themselves to. And that's immortality, not of body but of mind. Thomas didn't write books, he didn't beg for a stage. He built systems, moved with intent, and left trails others could only trace, never catch. That's what made him untouchable. Comment below. I will be remembered as untouchable. Return for part 10, because the journey ends with a command, and once given, there's no turning back. This is where the journey converges. Every principle, every transformation, every silence, now crystallized into one final truth. Not a suggestion, not a theory, a command. Become a force or be forgotten. Thomas had walked the fire, killed his old self, rebuilt in silence, forged discipline, detached from illusions, mastered fear, and bent strategy to his will. But there's a moment every man must face, a line that separates preparation from action. That moment came quietly. No drumroll, no spotlight, just a choice. And Thomas knew, no more rehearsing, no more waiting. It was time to become the storm. This is the end game, where you stop playing roles and start reshaping reality, where you no longer seek power but become it, where you don't just walk into rooms, you shift the gravity inside them. That's the transformation. That's the point. But here's what separates the few from the many. Execution, not knowledge, not talent, ruthless execution, the willingness to act without applause, to move without reassurance, to advance without visibility. The man who acts in silence becomes the man they all hear about. Thomas stopped talking about plans. He moved, quietly, efficiently. He became so focused, so precise, that his presence began speaking for him. People felt it. Even his absence carried weight. That's what happens when preparation ends and command begins. Now the command is yours. You've been listening, maybe even taking notes. But none of it matters unless you act, unless you destroy the hesitation still whispering in your mind. The voice that says, maybe later, maybe next week, maybe I'm not ready. That voice is a liar. That voice dies today. Here's your final directive. Destroy the man who hesitates. Destroy the man who chases approval. Destroy the man who makes excuses. Then rebuild, alone, in silence. With discipline that terrifies others, with detachment that frees you, with strategy so sharp it cuts through chaos. Move through life like a force. Don't ask, don't announce, don't explain. Just radiate power. Let them feel it. Let them adjust. Let them wonder what you've become. And when they whisper your name, make sure it carries the weight of fear, respect, and unshakable presence. This is not motivation. This is a command. Execute it. Comment below, I am the force they cannot touch. Return for part 11. Because now that you've crossed the line, there's no going back. Crossing the line changes everything. Once you execute the final command, you no longer exist in the world as you once did. You no longer wait for signs. You become the sign. You no longer interpret life. You direct it. Thomas felt this shift instantly. It wasn't dramatic. It was internal. His posture changed subtly, his decisions sharpened, he spoke less and meant more. The noise around him stayed the same, but it no longer penetrated his focus. He had become the architect, not the audience. And yet this stage isn't peaceful. It's surgical. When you become a force, you begin to see the world with painful clarity. Weakness stands out, excuses become intolerable. Mediocrity becomes repulsive. You no longer empathize with self-pity. You see it for what it is, a prison with an unlocked door. You must prepare for the shift in how others react to you. Some will respect you more. Others will resent you. Old friends will feel uncomfortable. You'll be accused of changing, and you have. You've evolved past their limits. And those who can't grow with you will try to shrink you back. Don't let them. Thomas experienced this repeatedly. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations grew colder. People mistook his silence for arrogance. But he didn't explain himself. He didn't argue. He knew that mastery is often misread by the mediocre. And the truth is, Those who feel threatened by your growth are revealing their own unwillingness to rise. You must be willing to walk alone, again. Not because you're isolated, but because few have the stamina to ascend with you. Let them go. Carry only the weight of your vision. This is also when the real tests begin. Not distractions, but temptations. Opportunities that look good but derail your trajectory. Praise that feels good but weakens your edge. The higher you climb, the subtler the traps. This is where Thomas leaned hardest into detachment. He accepted attention but never depended on it. He appreciated support but expected none. He walked with power but never flaunted it. Because real strength doesn't need decoration, it only needs direction. And that direction is forward. So listen carefully. Once you step into this phase, never return to the man who needed permission. Never explain your rise. Never justify your focus. And never dilute your intensity to make others comfortable. The world needs fewer men who fit in and more men who cannot be ignored. Comment below. I never return to weakness. Return for part 12. Because next, we weaponize silence and turn absence into authority. Silence is not absence. It's power withheld. Its presence unspoken. When used correctly, silence becomes one of your most devastating weapons. Thomas understood this instinctively. He had spent years learning to speak with precision. But now, he learned to say nothing and still communicate everything. In a noisy world, silence doesn't go unnoticed. It unsettles. It disrupts. It forces others to fill the void with their own insecurity. He stopped responding to provocation. No reaction to gossip. No reply to bait, no defense when attacked. His silence didn't mean surrender, it meant strategy. It forced others to guess, to overreach, to reveal themselves. While they unraveled, he remained composed. This is the principle. The less you say, the more weight your words carry. The less you appear, the more potent your presence becomes. People begin to question what you're thinking, what you're planning, why you're so calm. That uncertainty becomes leverage. Silence also amplifies focus. When Thomas cut the noise, pointless conversations, reactive texts, performative meetings, he found more clarity. The voice in his mind sharpened, ideas emerged cleaner, decisions became faster. Because silence isn't emptiness, it's bandwidth, and most people are drowning in distractions. You must understand this. Visibility is not always an asset. Sometimes being seen makes you a target. Sometimes being heard makes you predictable. But when you go quiet, strategically, your value increases. You become rare, and what is rare becomes respected. Thomas mastered the art of strategic disappearance. He knew when to step back, when to pause, when to vanish completely. And every time he returned, he was sharper, stronger, more dangerous. His absence wasn't a retreat, it was a reset. And people noticed. Not because he demanded attention, but because his silence demanded it for him. So don't rush to speak. Don't fight to be seen. Build yourself in the shadows, then move with such intent that your reappearance feels like a shift in the atmosphere. Let silence create mystery. Let absence build value. Let stillness make others tremble. Comment below. My silence is my presence. Return for part 13, because when the world begins to watch, you must show them control, not noise. When the world finally turns to look at you, the temptation to perform is overwhelming. To prove, to impress, to validate your transformation with volume. But this is where many break. They confuse attention with power and exposure with strength. Thomas didn't. He had prepared for this. He knew that true control isn't loud. It's quiet. It's internal. The man who truly holds power has no need to broadcast it. So when the spotlight found him, clients demanding meetings, former critics seeking guidance, strangers echoing his words, he didn't inflate. He refined. He stayed composed. This is the paradox. The more attention you receive, the more disciplined you must become. He carried his structure into every room. Never rushing, never filling silence to ease tension, never reacting to praise or provocation. The same habits he forged in solitude now governed his public presence, and people felt it, not as performance, but as command. Power reveals character. For those unprepared, visibility magnifies insecurity. They become desperate for applause. They start adjusting themselves for approval. But the man who is anchored, unshaken by noise, becomes magnetic. Not because he seeks to be, but because people crave stability in a world addicted to chaos. Thomas didn't talk about discipline. He was discipline. He didn't market his authority. He was the authority. He didn't post quotes about strength. He walked into rooms and changed the emotional temperature without saying a word. That is control. The ability to maintain your rhythm when the world screams for reaction. The ability to walk through temptation without flinching. The ability to be praised without becoming soft and criticized without becoming shaken. He never got drunk on attention. He remained focused, and in doing so, his legacy took shape, not as a brand, but as a standard. He became the man others pointed to, not because he told them to, but because they couldn't ignore him. Here's your lesson. When your time comes, and it will, do not rise with noise, rise with control. Do not chase the world. Wool. Let the world chase your example, and remember, those who move with noise get applause. Those who move with control build empires. Comment below, I rise with control. Return for part 14, because it's time to distill everything into your final identity, the version of you the world cannot bend. You've walked the fire. You've buried the weak version of yourself. You've rebuilt in silence, forged discipline, mastered detachment, bent strategy to your will, turned emotion into a weapon, cultivated presence through absence. And now there's only one step left, identity. Not the identity the world gave you. Not the one shaped by childhood conditioning, social roles, or professional titles. This is your final form. The unbending core that no failure, no praise, no betrayal can distort. Thomas didn't become someone new. He became who he always was, beneath the layers. The noise, the masks, the fears. This version of him, calm, strategic, disciplined, untouchable, wasn't an invention. It was a reveal. The world will still try to define you, your job, your past, your mistakes, your relationships. But none of those things are you. You are not a resume. You are not a reputation. You are not your history. You are what you repeatedly do when no one is watching. You are what you build when no one is cheering. That is identity. At this stage, Thomas stopped seeking roles. He didn't need to be called a leader. He simply led. He didn't need to be labeled strong. He simply remained unshaken. And that's how you know you've arrived, when you no longer introduce yourself, because your presence speaks for you. Identity, once forged, must be protected. Guard it like a fortress, not with defensiveness, but with consistency. Don't revert. Don't shrink. Don't adjust your frequency for those still vibrating at chaos. Hold the line, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. Because identity isn't a decision, it's a declaration, and it must be carved into your daily actions. When you wake up, how you train, what you allow, what you ignore, where you go, who you spend time with, all of it is a vote for who you are. So vote daily, vote relentlessly, until the man you built in the shadows is the only man who exists, until your old patterns are foreign, until your old fears feel laughable, until you can look in the mirror and not just respect what you see, but fear disappointing him. That's the final test, when the man you are becomes the man you refuse to betray. Comment below, I am who I forged. Return for part 15, because now we seal this journey, with legacy, with fire, and with the words they'll whisper long after you're gone. It ends here, and yet this is where it truly begins. Because everything you've forged, your discipline, your silence, your detachment, your strategy, was never about today. It was always about what outlives you. Thomas understood this. He had no interest in fame, no desire for applause. He wasn't building a reputation. He was building a force, a presence so deeply embedded in the people, rooms, and decisions he touched that forgetting him would be impossible. That is legacy. Legacy isn't made in loud moments. It's made in daily decisions, often unseen, often unacknowledged. It's crafted in the way you handle failure, the way you uphold your code when it would be easier to break it, the way you treat people when you could walk away, and the way you move forward when no one is watching. Thomas became the kind of man whose name didn't need to be mentioned because his influence was everywhere. His way of thinking, his way of leading, his refusal to fold. Even those who opposed him quietly studied him. That's the highest form of impact, not admiration, but transformation. When people begin to imitate you, even without liking you, you've already won. When they speak your name with reluctant respect, you've left a mark deeper than approval. When they adjust their own standards because yours made them uncomfortable, you've become immortal. This world will forget most. Time is ruthless like that, but it remembers the few who chose the harder road, the quieter path, the colder climb. Not because they asked to be remembered, but because forgetting them would mean forgetting what power looks like when it's earned. Thomas died one day, as all men do, but his shadow didn't. His principles lived on, in the men he shaped, in the systems he built, in the standards he refused to lower. And that's the question now, isn't it? What will remain when you're gone? Your title, your possessions, your social media posts? Or will it be something deeper? An invisible architecture that shapes the lives of those who followed you, even if they never knew your name? That is your task now, to take everything you've learned and live it so completely that the world cannot remain the same after you've touched it. So this is your final call. Destroy the old self, rebuild in silence, command with discipline, detach from chains, wield fear, move with strategy, project authority, control emotion, leave a legacy, become untouchable. Comment below, I am the force they cannot erase. And if this series moved you, if you felt something stir inside you, don't let it fade like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share in the comments what part changed you the most. Because your rise isn't just for you, it's for everyone who will never become free until they witness someone who already is. Let that someone be you.